Hello folks, my name is Patrick Case. I'm the president of National Readerboard Supply, and today I'm here to talk to you about how to build your own sign face and or how to apply tracking to an existing sign. We're going to go over the substrates, we're going to go over how to do it, we're going to show you some sample videos of exactly how you apply the materials. But the first thing we're going to start with is, you see here a very large open work table. You need to have a nice wide open space. It doesn't need to be as big as we have here today because we're shooting a video, but you do need to have a table that's large enough to be able to accommodate two people, because you'll need to have two people to apply the tracking down, and you need to have enough room to be able to work all the way around it, and a place where it can be left undisturbed for 24 hours. It doesn't take 24 hours for each individual track to set up, but it does take 24 hours for it to set up before you go in and install it outside to be used. The first thing we're going to start with are some of the substrates that you use. What you see lying here right now is considered, it's a measurement of 150 polycarbonate. This is sign grade white translucent polycarbonate. If you've got a backlit sign, you've got your own sign cabinet, this is the material you want to use. And I'm going to say again, it's 0.150 sign grade white translucent polycarbonate. I know it sounds like a mouthful, but if you can just write that down and repeat it, your plastic supply company will get you the exact right thing. And if you do have a sign cabinet and you're going to use this material, you want to have them cut it to whatever size. So you'll need to pull your old sign face out, measure it from edge to edge, top to bottom, and side to side, and then have the plastic supply company or your sign supply company get you that exact cut size. That way you don't have to worry about trying to cut this material. So this material is the top grade for being able to do sign faces, but for a lot of you on a budget, you can also use pressure treated plywood, paint it white. Now you can't be backlit obviously, but you can face light it and it'll still look like a great sign. You can put a frame around it, it'll look like $1 million, make you look top notch without spending all the money on polycarbonates. This stuff's not real expensive, but plywood's less expensive. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about this substrate here. Now this being polycarbonate, it has a sun side and a non-sun side. What you see here laying face up is the sun side, and it'll have a strip down it. It'll tell you which side's face up, which side gets exposed to the sun. And then there's a small film on here. See if I can get it started real quick and easy. And you can see here, this is a protective film that gets peeled off. And this film, it literally just peels off. And then this is a clean surface. We still wipe it down with alcohol, but this starts you off with a clean surface. To start off with, you'll see Mark over here, and he's preparing the first piece of track. Your first piece of track is the most important piece of track on the entire sign. It's got to be laid down straight, and we'll get into all that in just a little bit, but for the moment we're going to talk about what to do. So he's taking some normal rubbing alcohol, and he's cleaning the surface that will be applied directly to the substrate or to the sign face. And then Chuck back here in the back is going to be cleaning the sign face. You saw me strip off the protective material a moment ago, but there could still be a little bit of adhesive residue or whatever from that. So just to be safe, we always wipe it down with alcohol, and that also knocks down the static electricity so you don't pull in other debris maybe floating in the air. It's not a big deal, okay? So if you get a little teeny bit of something on the sign, don't sweat it. We're a little bit of perfectionists because we're supposed to be, we're the professional. But you at home or you out in the shop, your sign will be fine if it gets a small amount of debris under it. Don't sweat it. All right, and this stage right here is where your measurement comes in. It's very important that you take accurate measurements. Now, if you have a sign cabinet with the lights inside, you want to make sure and measure. There's a retainer lip, and it's usually a 1.5 inch or 2 inch retainer lip. And what you see them doing here is getting ready to figure out where the retainer is, and we're actually building a sign face for a local store here. So what we're showing you is you got to make sure your measurements are accurate. Measure it twice, because once you lay this track down, it's permanent. So you want to make sure you double check your measurements. And then once you have them, we recommend a grease pencil, because you can always erase the grease pencil off. Red or black's fine, but you want to make little marks on here so that you can find them, get your things lined up, and then of course be able to erase the marks so they don't show. Again, if you leave a mark on it for you guys, it's not that big a deal. But what we'll do here is they make a straight line on the sides, because if you have a sign cabinet, on the sides you don't want your tracking going all the way to the end of the sign or the end of the sign face, because then you can't get your cabinet, you can't get it inside the cabinet. There has to be a space about 2 inches all the way around so that the sign face, the retainer wall, the retainer clip can hold the face in place so that when the wind blows, etc., it's what holds the sign in. In this particular case, the retainer is 2 inches, so they're measuring up 2 1/4, so they got a 1/4 inch above that retainer, so the first row of tracking is not resting on that, because there is some weight to this. You want the weight of the sign face to sit in the bottom of the channel so that none of the tracking is being holding any weight. So they got the first line, and what we're going to do is we're going to demonstrate how to apply weld-on. Now let me step back 1 second. If you've got pressure treated plywood that you've painted white, then you're going to want to drill your tracking for a place for screws, and I'll get into more detail, but we're going to drill the tracking, and you want your hole to be slightly larger than the screw you're going to use, because as the wood or the metals expand and contract in the hot and cold, you want to make sure this has a little bit of space to move around. And then when you put the screws in, that way you won't crack any tracking later on. Alright, here you see these guys getting ready to apply the first line of track. And now, like I mentioned earlier, your first line of track is the very most important. I'm going to go over the different types of tracks because there's 3 of them, but I first want to really reiterate the importance of your first line of track has to go down very carefully. You got to make sure it's absolutely straight, because all your other lines of track are built off your first line of track, and I'll show you what you mean. But to get started with, let me try and show you this, and I don't know how well it's going to show up in the camera, but there's 3 types of tracking: top, bottom, and mutual. Top tracking has a very deep channel here, and then it has the mounting surface. Your bottom track has a thin channel, a very small channel, and then the mounting surface. And a mutual track acts as the top and bottom of the other row, if that makes any sense. But you've got a deep channel for the top and a shallow channel for the bottom of the previous row. You'll see what I mean in just a second. I also wanted to talk about what you apply here is called weld-on. Weld-on number 16. There's a little bit of a story behind this. I'm going to make this quick, but to make it a long story short, you can't really ship this through the mail anymore. So we are unable to ship this to you, but ironically, you can still buy it off eBay. And you can pay the same thing we pay for it, because we buy ours off eBay now, strangely. But you want weld-on number 16, and this is a 5-ounce tube. There's a 1.5-ounce tube and a 5-ounce tube. They look identical in pictures, so make sure you get the 5-ounce tube. This will give you enough weld-on to do an entire sign face with enough left over if you make any mistakes. But you have to be careful with this, because this is not an adhesive. What this does is it literally melts the tracking and melts the sign face and then rehardens. It welds the tracking to the sign face. Now, if you're using treated plywood, like we mentioned before, you can drill your tracking. Just use a small drill, slightly larger than the screw you're going to use, and you can use stainless steel screws. Be sure and use stainless steel, because if you don't use stainless steel, the screws will end up rusting and running rust tears down your sign, and it won't look good. Stainless steel screws will maintain their appearance, and they'll hold up real well, so be sure and use stainless steel. If you don't like the idea of using the weld-on, I'm a big fan of the weld-on because it keeps the letters from slipping between the track anywhere. You can also use these white plastic rivets, which virtually disappear on the tracking. These are used nationwide. People use these all the time. They're a great product, but I just happen to be a fan of the weld-on because it makes much more secure tracking. Otherwise, as the sign heats and cools in the summertime and wintertime, your tracking can get little waves in it if you're using the rivets, and maybe a letter will drip in behind it, just droop in behind it, start to slip through the back of the track. So today we're using weld-on. I talked to you about the tracking being top, bottom, and mutual, and we're going to let this set up for a few minutes, and then we'll show you about spacers, and we'll go on from there. So now we've laid the first piece of tracking, the bottom track, and it's set up for about 15 minutes now, and we're ready to move on to laying the first piece of mutual track. Now, your bottom track is as you'll see here, this is a spacing chart. You may be wondering how you guarantee the space distance between each piece of tracking. That's what we're going to go over. And this is a spacing chart, and we'll send it to you and make sure you've got a copy of it. And what it does is it explains that whatever size letter you use, it tells you how big to make what we call a spacing block. These are spacing blocks. You see 2 of them laying behind me, and then we have another one here to show you. And what these do is you simply, once your track is set, and like I mentioned, the bottom track is set for about 15 minutes. Now, if you push on it, it can be moved. So you don't want to be brutal with it, but you can lay these up against it real carefully. I'm going to let these guys get started. And they're going to lay these spacing blocks. You see they're nice and long. They pretty much fill the board. And that way, when they go to lay the mutual track, and again, the mutual track has the deep channel on the bottom and the shallow channel on top, and they're going to run a bead of weld-on down the mutual track, and then they're going to flip it over and lay it up against these spacing blocks. And that's why you see how important it is that your first line of track is really, really straight, because if the first one's wavy, they're all going to be wavy. So it's important that you take your time, lay that first one carefully, give it time to set up, and then you can come back in, put your spacing blocks in place, and then you'll see these guys flip this over, and they're going to lay the tracking up. Now remember, the deep channel goes down and the shallow channel goes up. This is the top of the previous row and the bottom of the next row. And what they're going to do now is flip this over, and then it's real important, once they get it in place, you're going to see them rubbing down on it, pushing it down. You want to make sure that the weld-on makes real good contact so it can do its job. It melts both surfaces and rehardens so that the track becomes one. The track and the face become one piece. If you're back to a pressure-treated piece of plywood, you're going to just use screws and set it up, but I would still recommend your spacing blocks, because with this spacing chart and using spacing blocks, your sign tracking will come out straight and your letters will fit every time. You may know people that have to slide their letters in from the end. Somebody didn't do the tracking right. If you do the tracking right, your letters should slip up into the top, drop into the bottom, and rest easily. We'll show you how that works. Okay, so we're back again, and they're laying a bit of bead on this. They've already moved their spacing bars up to the next one. The second set of tracking is already set for about 15 minutes. And again, they're putting mutual track on. I want to talk about when they're laying it. I know you can't see this very well, but they've got the deep channel facing up so that after they put the bead on, you're going to watch them here in just a second, and they're going to flip it over and onto the sign face. If you're in a confined area, you want to be sure and basically have your mutual track upside down, and then as you see here, they're flipping it over. Now the deep channel faces the bottom again, and this way it's simple. It gets in place easily. No fuss, no muss. Now you've got some time to move this around. You've got 2 or 3, maybe even 4 minutes or so. You can maybe even have 5. But once you apply pressure, when you see them starting to press it down, once they apply the pressure, it's not moving anymore. It stays in place. Now it'll stay in place for maybe a minute and a half, 2 minutes without, just because of the vacuum on the piece. Yeah. But then pretty soon it hardens up, and then within about 5 minutes you can touch it with your nail. If you have a piece that's globbed out a little bit, and it's getting hard. You can still dig your nail into it. It hasn't set. It's got to set for 24 hours to be ready to use. But once you get it pressurized down, the track's in place. So be sure and always use your spacing blocks. And now you see these guys flipping over the last piece of track. They've switched sides of the table because it's hard to reach over, and they're laying the last piece. This is the top piece of tracking. On this particular sign, there's going to be a header on top of it. That's why there's a big open space at the top. But they're laying the last piece of tracking. This is called the top track. It's the deep channel piece of tracking. And as far as the spacer bars, the spacer blocks, these spacer blocks need to be made out of 1/2-inch plywood or some kind of material that's at least a 1/2 inch thick. You can see it if you can see closely. I don't know if you can see this in the video or not, but it sits up above the track line. You don't want to try and use a letter or something like that. You want to make something thick enough to where it sits big enough to where all the tracking can push up against it and not slip under it or over it. So make sure you make some nice secure spacer blocks that are at least a 1/2 inch thick. And then here again you see them pressing this down. So this sign face is going to be done in just a few more minutes. We're going to show you the whole tracking system. The bottom track is the shallow channel. You can see how the letter will slip underneath it. You go to the mutual tracking and you've got the deep channel toward the bottom and the shallow channel toward the top. I know I keep going over this, but this is really critically important. You'll see that we've worked each one of them up, and you'll see our grease line here. This will all be erased off, and you go all the way up another mutual track until you get to the top track. The top track has got your deep channel facing down, and there's nothing else above it. That's why they call this the top, mutuals, bottoms. You get the drift. Alright, you see the fellas here, they're cleaning off the grease pencil. You remember where we marked them down to know exactly where to put things? They're cleaning up all the grease pencil markings. And I'm going to talk to you about your suction cup and how the lettering goes in. The one thing I want to be sure and cover about the suction cup is it's very, very important that your suction cup's in good shape. You should replace these about every other year. Bad suction cups are the #1 cause of broken sign faces, broken tracking, broken poles, broken letters. Keep these cups up. It's cheap insurance. Your staff could be out there beating on $1,000 worth of sign with a $25 suction cup. So be sure and keep the suction cup in good shape. Then I want to talk to you guys about one of the problems that we run into. People call us about their letters don't fit correctly, or they get the sign face and something's not quite right, and I want to show you what it is. Fellas, will you flip this upside down for me? What happens, the story we get, people will call and they'll say, oh, my letter's too short. It doesn't fit the track quite right. And what happens is, I can't even get behind there, lean that forward a little bit, there we go. What happens is they'll lean out like this, or the wind will get behind them and blow them out. So what it is actually it's upside down. Remember, the deep channel is the top channel, the shallow channel is at the bottom channel. Let's flip it back over. The way it's supposed to work, you should be able to get your suction cup on your letter and slip it up into the top, drop it into the bottom, twist your cup to the right, and release it. It's that simple. It works like that all the time. Now, If the wind's blowing, the weather's blowing, it's in there. They're in there to stay. And that's how they're supposed to fit. Tucks up in the top, drops into the bottom, release the cup. And then you can say any message you want. It works extremely well. So this is what I want to show you on this sign. Make sure when you put the sign in that you've got the deep channel at the top and the shallow channel at the bottom. I know I sound like a broken record, but this is a big deal. You'd be amazed how many people call about this problem. Well, folks, I hope this has been helpful. We tried to show you how to build a sign face. We talked about some different materials. But remember, if you need anything at all, if you have any questions, I've been doing this a long time. Perfectly happy to help you. I want to make sure your sign looks good for you. So don't hesitate to call us at 1-800-243-6676. We're here to help you out. Let us know what we can do to help you. Thanks again.